Thank you, Veit, for that lovely introduction. It was really very nice. And I would also like to express my warm thank you to Christoph and Helmut and to all the staff of the Rachel Carson Center for making this day so wonderful and inspiring. And thanks to the fellows and students for all your encouragement, your ideas, and in this difficult process of writing this book on soil, seeds, and politics that I've undertook this year. Well, and that book also brought me to my interest in glyphosate. You may be part of those thousands of European consumers concerned about their health and well-being who signed the petition of the European Commission to forbid the use of glyphosate, the #1 weed killer, the most common herbicide in the world. An estimated 8.6 billion kilograms of glyphosate have been used worldwide since the 1970s. In 1914, farmers sprayed enough glyphosate to apply on average 0.5 kilogram per hectare on all cropland worldwide. To give you an idea, 0.5 kilogram used to be enough in the 1990s to control all vegetation on 1 hectare field. So this would mean the farmers were capable of eradicating all vegetation on all fields in the entire world. Today, however, some farmers apply up to 7 kilograms of glyphosate per hectare, like in Argentina, and many, however, still do without any herbicide. Glyphosate was patented and branded as the herbicide Roundup by Monsanto in the 1970s. Its patent expired in 2000, and the substance is now mostly produced in China, which exports 40% of all glyphosate in use worldwide. Since the patent expired, the price has declined, and glyphosate has become cheap. It is used on assorted crops that have been bred and were genetically engineered to become resistant against the herbicide so that it can be sprayed in crop without affecting the emerging small crop plants. Genetically engineered herbicide-tolerant crops now account for about 56% of all global glyphosate use. Globally, glyphosate use has risen about 15-fold since so-called Roundup-ready genetically engineered glyphosate-tolerant crops were introduced in 1995. Glyphosate has been demonized in Europe, similar to DDT at the time when Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring in 1962. Glyphosate is accused of being unhealthy, an endocrine disruptor causing cancer, male sterility, infertility, gluten intolerance, autism, you name it. I mean, there's a whole range of things that it's accused of. But many farmers love it, especially on the Canadian prairies. Let us follow the molecule glyphosate and examine why it is of such central importance for agriculture that politicians shy away from forbidding it. The German agriculture minister caused a government crisis this spring by endorsing its use. The French parliament authorized its use in a night session last week, invalidating the promise made by President Macron to forbid it. But I will now take you to Saskatchewan. Oops, sorry. To visit one of the farmers enthusiastic about glyphosate. In 2008, I phoned Bob just the evening before, and he was immediately happy to have me come and observe him seed. Full of enthusiasm, he explained the new air seeder to me that he had modified together with his dad, replacing the cultivator shovels by disc openers. The disc openers were 2 round blades that stood in a 5-degree angle to one another, the second disc slightly offset to the back from the first disc. These discs allowed to cut into the soil almost without disturbing it, maintaining the cover of stubble and the residues that lay on it. Pulling the disca with a tractor used half the amount of fuel as pulling the seeder with the cultivator shovels. The rotary blades cut, the seed fell in behind, and a packer wheel closed the furrow that the blades had cut. The day after he seeded, before the crop emerged, he sprayed glyphosate. Bob told me that the system was perfect. It allowed for direct seeding into stubble or even weeds. The moisture of the soil was conserved because it was not exposed to evaporation. The earth crust was kept intact. That insulated the soil and thus conserved the moisture. Moisture was the most important element in the prairies, he told me. The residue contributed to building up organic matter. He let the straw of wheat and oats stand as long as possible to collect snow in the winter. Peas that he had seeded into the stubble climbed up on the straw, which prevented them from lying on the ground when ripening. They could thus be thrust more easily. Brent read an article which said that in a zero-till plot, 300 earthworms live on 1 square meter. The earthworm tunnels were lined with nitrifying bacteria, and thousands of microorganisms cooperated. Going through the system with a shovel destroyed it. Bob was very pleased with the technology of direct seeding. Also because it was much less work and because it saved a considerable amount of fuel. He basically applied a pre-harvest application of glyphosate in the fall, on this wheat for example, just before harvesting, which killed the crop plant and the weeds in the field. He then harvested the crop, leaving as much stubble as possible standing in the field. In the spring he had quite a clean field in which he seeded using a disca, as we have seen. And just before the plant emerged, he gave it another application of Roundup to kill all the emerging weeds and give the crop plant a comparative advantage. Roundup applications cost him about $5 per acre, which other herbicides that can be applied to the standing crop were much more expensive, $25 an acre. He said, glyphosate is less toxic and decomposes as soon as it gets into contact with the soil. He told me again and again how much his farming techniques had changed since 1994 when he started farming. It was much less work now, that he was no longer tilling the fields every 2 or 3 years to let them lay fallow over the summer. He could farm more land in less time, burn less fuel, prevent erosion, conserve moisture, and build up organic matter. He liked his job, but he still preferred not to work and have more free time to go fishing, scuba diving, flying ultralight aeroplanes, and spending time with his kids. Bob Sand is farming 1,000 hectares that he partially inherited from his dad and bought with money he made custom spraying for other farmers. He told me that his attitude to work is evolving differently than the one of his father and grandfather. His grandfather knew nothing but work. His father started to appreciate to have more free time and moved around, but he himself has come to travel and has come to appreciate his hobbies. Although he likes his work, it's no longer all there is. He wants to take off and see the world. He showed me winter wheat stubble on which he had applied another herbicide, Edge, in a surface application in the fall to prevent the germination of the weeds. And under the stubble he showed me how moisture was conserved and which weeds were coming up. He found little wild oat seeds which had not germinated. He wanted to seed mustard here and will apply Roundup a few days after seeding. He showed me flaxweed, white oats and stinkweed coming. It takes him 4 to 5 years to zero-till until the annual weeds are controlled. They only emerge if they are disturbed, covered with soil. He showed me, making great gestures, how all is a question of who gets ahead of the other. With Roundup, you kill the weeds that grew before the crop emerged and would have covered the small plants up. The small plant crops can thus emerge virtually without competitors. They can profit from the moisture conserved under the straw, get the nitrogen he has put in, and profit from the organic matter that he has conserved and left undisturbed. As he said, as good a job as it gets. The efficiency of the molecule glyphosate to kill all plants makes European citizens think that glyphosate is the most toxic of all agrochemicals. In comparative doses, however, glyphosate may be one of the more innocuous herbicides. In effect, its effect on the plant is not by contact but by systemic action. Sprayed on the leaves, it is absorbed by the entire plant, brought from the leaves to the root system. It interferes with soil bacteria, which explains why one of the patents on the molecule was also for its effect as an antibiotic. Another patent claim on glyphosate concerns its effect on fungi. It reduces the potential for the fungal plant disease rust. Glyphosate does not leach easily because the molecule and its primary metabolite, aminomethylphosphonic acid, binds with soil molecules and persists in the soil. Recent studies demonstrated that 10 to 60% of glyphosate subsist, especially in cold climates, and after 1 year can still be detected in the soil. Before the introduction of Roundup-ready crops, glyphosate was mainly used to replace tillage before seeding. It became an essential component of the zero-till system that revolutionized industrial agriculture all over the world and has taken off in Europe as well. Zero-till and associated to it the use of glyphosate were heralded as a solution to the problems that tillage provokes soil erosion. Tillage also released the CO2 and methane from the soil, and reduced tillage, thanks to herbicide use, became an essential element in the climate mitigation strategy for 1000, advanced by Le Foll, then French agriculture minister, at the COP21 conference. The promise of this mitigation strategy is the calculation that all agricultural soils in the world would fix an additional 4/1000th of soil carbon. The problem of global warming would be solved. The total herbicide glyphosate was thus instrumental for nothing less than a technological revolution in cultivation techniques. It allowed to replace the plow, and in North America, since the disastrous consequences of the Dust Bowl, it replaced the cultivator with broad shovels by disc openers or seed drills with opening knives, capable of placing the seed exactly at the desired soil depth without disturbing the soil structure. Tractors have become almost useless for this type of farming. On the Canadian prairies, they are only used for pulling the seeding implements. Since more and more herbicide-resistant crops were introduced, in Canada the main moneymaker is herbicide-resistant canola, farmers brought their own 40-meter large high-clearance sprayers that allowed them to spray without affecting the ripening crop. Farmers also started to spray glyphosate to give their ripening non-glyphosate resistant crop what they call harvest aid. Wheat, lentils, canola and other crops are sprayed a few days before harvest. The glyphosate kills and therefore uniformly dries the crop, making it ready for harvest all at the same time. It also kills the weeds under the crop canopy. The farmers no longer need to swath the crop to let it dry out on the ground, but can straight cut and combine it all in one go. They also have a clean black field over the winter month. The seeding implement, the sprayer and the large combine with straight cut table represent an investment of almost $2 million if bought new. It may be even more than $2 million actually. The feeling of total control and the impression of doing good for the soil, for the climate, and having more time with their family seems to be worth the high financial risks farmers are taking. The zero-till system does not compose, however, with the agency and intentionality of non-human actors. plants called weeds, fungi, soil particles, and even the molecule glyphosate itself. When I visited Bob again 5 years later, he had changed his cropping patterns to alternate between flax and oats, because his wheat was badly impacted by Fusarium head blight, and his canola by Sclerotina, both fungal diseases. I asked him whether he saw a link between these fungal diseases and the use of glyphosate in zero-till, an association that Miriam Fernandez of the research station in current Saskatchewan had pointed out. He thought that there was no such link, and that the claim was unscientific and scaremongering. He maintained that glyphosate dissolved very quickly in the soil and was basically a salt. This salt, however, as a toxologist of Ag Canada explained to me, is of a high volatility. Most herbicides break down into salts as they move into the atmosphere. The salt molecules attach to natural aerosols as they are photodegraded, washed out, settled out, or landed out. The salts can then be found in as remote places as the polar caps. Anat Singh calls this out-of-control reproduction of invasive species and volatile substances feral proliferation. It responds to the imposition of monocultures and needs human intervention to get started. Farmers' love for clean, homogeneous fields is in fact a systemic imperative linked to the fundamental search for increased labor productivity and yield. Biological simplification and standardization are a pivotal part of the pursuit of scale, but they also create conditions that other species can take advantage of. Bob told me that glyphosate did not get cleaver and kosher wheat, which had a tendency to spread, as it had no longer other wheat competitors. As weeds become resistant to glyphosate, they take advantage of their privileged position with respect to other weeds and fill the space left by them. Kosher has become such a weed in Saskatchewan. The seeds of glyphosate-resistant weeds are carried by the wind from field to field and spread. It is just a question of time when glyphosate will become ineffective as a total herbicide. Bob followed agronomic advice when he mixed Authority, a highly toxic sulfentrazone herbicide, together with glyphosate in the same tank. He showed me the spots in his flax field where he missed a spot and where cleaver and kosher thrived. He also sprayed the sloughs to avoid the spreading of weeds from there. The ideal weather for spraying is a sunny, wind-still day, so that the herbicide cannot drift into the neighboring fields' yards and destroy the wrong plants. Many farmers, however, are in a hurry to get all their crops sprayed. On many windy days, when I hoped to visit with farmers, as I didn't want to go on a sprayer, they were in fact go out spraying. The view of the weeds growing inside the crops seems to put the farmer into a state of near panic. Canada thistle is a perennial species of flowering plant native throughout Europe that is classified as a noxious weed in Canada that organic farmers have the greatest difficulties of dealing with. Its root system spreads underground, and over the ground it disperses an amazing amount of seeds. One of the methods of controlling is pre-harvest burnout. A friend of Bob's, Thomas, does not want to spray herbicide, though, on the ripening crop, as it will definitely enter the food chain. He tries to spray Canada thistle on summer fallow in August, when the plants bring down nutrients to the roots together with the glyphosate that will kill them. But 2 years later, thistles are back, thick as ever. Plants are able to adapt to environmental pressure. Regular spraying at a determined moment in the year becomes such a pressure, to which the plants react by sprouting later in the year or setting seed outside the window of spraying. Anthropologist Natasha Mayers picked the brains of plant scientists for explanation and found out that plants keep time using complex networks of interacting genes and proteins that are conceived as internal timers. These circadian clocks are sensitive to changing environmental signals, such as shifts in the number of hours of daylight over the course of a year, or the varying amount of heat and cold or humidity and dryness in each season. Plant geneticists Karpinski and Czeczynska-Ebda explain that plants are able to perform biological quantum computation and memorize light in order to optimize their Darwinian fitness. Plants grow tolerant to difficult conditions, such as excessive or inadequate light, water, salt, and temperature, and resistant to pathogens. Not only is plant physiology known to change under stress, but changes in the genome have also been identified. Glyphosate is thus like an entry drug, the marijuana of chemical dependency. The sheer volume used and the fact that glyphosate molecules bind with the soil and subsist over long periods of time makes it a hazardous chemical in the medium term. Driven by the growing diversity of uses and dramatic increases in volumes, level of glyphosate and its metabolites have been detected in the air, soil and water. In countries like Canada, that authorizes the cultivation of glyphosate-resistant plants, the spraying becomes indiscriminate, the surfactants hold the molecule down on the plant, the glyphosate gets into all parts of the crop, and weeds learn to resist. Bob's friend Thomas was no fan of glyphosate. He used 2,4-D on the wheat to take care of broadleaf weeds and achieve 2,4-D mixture against wild oats. On another field, he applied the herbicide Curtail because it had thistle. On the flax, he used Curtail again. Its active ingredient, coparalid, enters treated vegetation through the leaves and roots and replaces natural auxins at binding sites, causing abnormal growth patterns and disrupting the growth processes of the plant. It is toxic to some beneficial insects like ladybugs and lacewings. Farmers in Saskatchewan grow a lot of canola, called the green gold of the prairies. Almost all of it is of one of the herbicide-resistant types. The three herbicide-tolerant weed control systems in canola are Clearfield, canola resistant to imidazoline chemistry, Liberty Link, canola resistant to glyphosinate ammonium, a naturally occurring broad-spectrum systemic herbicide produced by several species of streptomycin soil bacteria, Roundup Ready canola resistant to glyphosate. As weeds become resistant to these three herbicides, canola varieties have been developed in collaboration of the three competing firms, Monsanto, Bayer Crop Science and BASF, that stack the three resistant genes to allow them to be sprayed if necessary with all three herbicides layered one on top of the other. However, superweeds have emerged, able to survive even this concerted chemical attack. Jason Moore stressed the superweed effect as a way in which non-human natures overtake human abilities to control. Built into this agricultural system are perpetual biophysical overrides, as Tony Weiss would phrase it. Biophysical overrides are continually responding to, but never resolving, the root problem, in ways that mask and deepen old problems and establish new risks. Farmers return to highly toxic older herbicides. Monsanto and DuPont obtained authorization in Canada to commercialize seeds genetically engineered to resist to glyphosate and the older herbicides dicamba and 2,4-D. Dicamba herbicide has been banned in many countries because it is highly volatile. If the weather is right, often in early morning, a cloud of dicamba herbicides may lift up from a sprayed field and travel several hundred meters to come down on another field, destroying the entire crop. Many of the new herbicide brands on offer are in fact recompositions of old chemicals such as 2,4-D. 2,4-D, as you know, is one of the oldest and most widely available herbicides in the world, having been commercially available since 1945 and is now produced by many chemical companies since the patent on it has long since expired. 2,4-D is, by the way, one of the ingredients in Agent Orange, a herbicide that was widely used during the Vietnam War. Other herbicides in use are paraquat, that is highly toxic and causes respiratory illnesses, MCPA, with the chlorophenoxy compound categorized as highly toxic, bromoxynil, Avanax, also acutely toxic, Treflan, and so on and so on. The chemical override confirms Adorno's dictum, the promises of development that modernity gives us offers false alternatives. The molecule glyphosate, because it is less toxic than other herbicides, has been so widely used that it transformed the technological infrastructure of farming. Farmers indebted themselves. No, what is happening here? This is not what I wanted. Farmers indebted themselves to invest in expensive direct seeding equipment, high clearance sprayers, combines with elaborate straight cut tables, and these investments cannot be easily reversed without many farmers going bankrupt. As one farmer told me, he felt like being driven down a chute by corporations in an ever-increasing cycle of debt. Fusarium spreads rapidly because the environment is so uniform. If farmers cannot hang on to glyphosate, they adopt other herbicides that are more toxic. The infrastructure of monocropped order has unplanned feral effects. DDT was finally forbidden 15 years after the publication of Rachel Carson's book in most countries of the world, but the problems it posed have not disappeared, as farmers adopted other toxic chemicals like neonicotinoids, and insect loss continues. Can farmer divorce from herbicides? Are there real alternatives to glyphosate and its even more toxic successors and predecessors? Organic farming today is more and more done at a large scale too. To suppress weeds, organic farmers practice companion cropping, invent ingenious mechanical devices like broom chasers, crimper rollers, flame weeding, propane torches pass down crop rows at high speed, and the blast of heat kills tender young weeds without harming the crop, which is usually protected either by shields or by its larger size. Researchers are also busy investigating options like blasting weeds with grit, cooking them with steam, or frying them with electricity, though none of these options are in current widespread use. There is a huge diversity of machines designed to weed between rows of plants, and often between the plants themselves. Different implements are better suited to different crops, soils, and farms. A common trait is the desire to eliminate weeds while causing as little soil disturbance as possible. Cultivating too much and too deep are not only hurts soil structure and soil biology, but it can also damage crop roots. Where machines don't reach, big organic can mean big labor exploitation, as Julie Guthman showed. Computer and robotic technology is helping to make mechanical weed control more efficient and effective. Farmers use GPS systems to guide their equipment down crop rows, and sensors can even distinguish between vegetable plants and weeds. Bayer, now fused with Monsanto, has long invested in digital agriculture. They hold huge databases. They begin to sell information on crop composition, weed pressure and weather, all together with their seeds, their genetic traits and their chemicals, and thus create new packages of weed solutions that they can sell to farmers. Beneficial soil bacteria and fungi discovered are patented now. Agribusiness strategists have already moved on beyond glyphosate. New juicy business opportunities are waiting. Is that the type of agriculture we want? Do we want computers and robots to feed us and replace the last farmers on the land? Is the sensorial capacity of perception that farmers developed over millenniums of working with soils and seeds superfluous? Will machines better than humans at last outsmart what farmers call weeds? Are weeds really the enemies of food, as the verb weeding out, putting to waste indicates? How come there is no word for weeds in many languages, for instance in Gujarati? I try to show the unintended consequences of the great human master plan for the industrialization of agriculture and food production by shifting the gaze following non-humans that are playing a key role in these processes. Focusing on how non-humans react to and act on agricultural policy making allows seeing connections, relationships and interactions that are evident but have largely remained invisible. I hope my in-depth description of how the chemical glyphosate, together with resisting weeds, toxic fungi like fusarium, and agricultural machinery, acts and are embedded in sets of material, social and political relations and representations, may help take an alternative viewpoint on the tangles of the industrialization of agriculture and food systems. Signing the petition against glyphosate is definitely not enough. Use what you are best at, your courage, creativity and imagination to mobilize for policies scaling down agriculture, breaking up corporate monopolies and favoring the return of caring farmers attuned to interspecies dependencies. Thank you very much for your attention.